Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast. This is a weekly half-hour program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. A reminder that any of the viewpoints or thoughts that are shared during this program are that of the individual brother and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, Concordant, or appendant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, and back on the podcast as we continue our Building Better Builders series, Brother John Nagy. Welcome back, Brother John.
Welcome back for having me. Oh God, I messed that up. It's a great.
Your turn.
It's my turn. It's great to. It's great to be here, Brother Michael. Thanks for having me back.
I'm a little sad because we're closing out the final part of our series here on the working tools of Master Mason, as tonight we get to that third degree. And before we get to the questions, I just wanted to get your insight on the memory of the third degree. I don't know about you, but for me, I had asked my Masonic mentor, hey, is everything that's in this Masonic Lodge, all the questions I have, you're telling me this is all going to be answered here? Yes was the answer I got. And by the end of the night, I would have to say there is that one moment. And when you look at the top three things that you'll never forget about your life as you look back, being raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason, that is an experience that I will never forget, and I'll always cherish that. How about you?
It was quite a ride. Quite a ride. And in fact, I had two bald spots in my hairy chest as a consequence of that third ruffian grabbing a hold of me and asking from me something that I had no clue what he was asking. So yes, very memorable. And I got the bloody t-shirt to remind me.
That's good. We've been focusing on the working tools, which this is a part of the ritual. No spoiler alert here, but the working tools of a Master Mason are all of the working tools of the Master Mason. How disappointed were you? I was very disappointed. I was expecting like a particular set of tools because that's what we've gotten through with the other preceding degrees. And when it was like, oh, the working tool of Master Mason is all of the working tools. I was like, what?
How disappointed was I when they showed this little pointy thing that I was supposed to spread stuff with? I can't say I was disappointed because my mind goes in directions that are uncommon for most people. I felt like I was in that Burger King commercial with Sarah Keller saying, "Where's the beef?" I saw the trowel. It was an operative tool that I was told that we were supposed to be using speculatively. And the speculative way we were supposed to be using it was to spread the cement of brotherly love and affection to make one common bond. And I'm saying to myself, did I miss something? I'm in the third degree and they're telling me I'm supposed to be spreading something with this tool speculatively. And yet there was absolutely no mention up until this point of anything about putting cement together. No materials, no process, no guidance, nothing. So the first thing that came to my mind is, where's the cement? Where's the cement mentioned in ritual? All of a sudden, I've got the cement being thrown at me, or this phrase, and there was no mention of cement up to this particular point. But I've got this great working tool that I'm supposed to be spreading this stuff with. But how do we make the cement? So it wasn't so much a disappointment as in a just big gap in the education, because you would have thought by this time, as a Master Mason apprenticing and going through the fellowcraft all the way up to this point, there would have been some mention about how to make cement that was supposed to be spreading with this working tool called the trowel. So that was where I was left. I was left with this question, where's the cement?
For me, as a marketing professional, I sat there and went, oh, masonry, trowel, okay. That's an obvious. It's not much of a reach, you know. It also started to make sense when I had observed on Master Mason's rings. Some of them have the trowel, and then there's the plumb that's also in there with the square and compasses and the letter G in the center of the ring. That also kind of started to make sense. But now that you asked this question, it's like, what is the cement of Freemasonry?
I'm now looking at my ring and I'm saying, well, there's a trowel right there, you know? And I'm looking down at it. I'm saying, well, I'm still looking for the cement. I don't see any cement. And we're supposed to be spreading it. So
Right.
as a consequence of that question coming up, I started looking at how the cement is actually created. And that led me to research. And it was about a year and a half process of looking at cement. And of course, I went on the internet and I wrote, how do you make cement? And I came across this term, ordinary Portland cement. And I said, oh, Portland, Oregon, wait a second. I'm sure they had cement long before Portland came into the Union. And then I found, oh, no, it's across the pond. It's not Portland, Oregon. It's Portland across the, in Europe. And ordinary Portland cement was created by a guy that was trying to create a process of making artificial stone. The formula consists of lime, obviously, silica, ferric, and ammonia oxides. Then basically you have to process it and add water to it. So I was saying to myself, okay, so where in ritual does it talk about lime? Where does it talk about silica, ferric, and alumina oxides? And I scratched my head. And I'm saying to myself, well, I'm sure if the trowel is being shown, there's got to be cement hidden somewhere in ritual, because why would you show a trowel and tell everybody you're supposed to be spreading the cement of brotherly love and affection? And, it's an operative tool being used speculatively. So where's the operative cement and what's the process? I got my first clue when I said, okay, well, how do you make lime? And then I tunneled down that rabbit hole and found out that lime comes from limestone. And then I said, wait a second. I remember something in the first degree having to do with limestone. They didn't call it limestone. They called it chalk.
Right.
And at that particular point, I said to myself, okay, I got the first element. Okay. So as I tunneled down that rabbit hole, trying to grab a hold of that rabbit's foot, I came across the fact that in order to create lime from limestone, ordinary chalk, you have to heat it. And you have to heat it up to 800 degrees, but not more than 1,000. So there's a window of prime working, a window of operation that you have to be heating this chalk. And the limestone literally at that temperature starts boiling off carbon dioxide. And as a result of boiling off carbon dioxide, you wind up with lime. But if you go over 1,000 degrees centigrade, forgot to mention what scale we're using, you wind up getting something called dead burn lime. And apparently if you go over 1,000 degrees, what happens is the chalk winds up becoming lime that is not activated or reactive to adding anything to it. I guess it burns off too much. I'd have to look up what dead burn lime actually is, but there is a sweet spot between 800 centigrade and 1,000 that you have to operate within in order to get the kind of lime that you want to create cement. I'm saying to myself, well, okay, so we heat the chalk. Well, what do we have that we could use to heat chalk with? And of course, I said, well, what other elements in the first degree do we have? And right away I said, well, charcoal lights and ignites at about 800 degrees. And
honestly, leave it to you to be able to find the ingredients and tell us how to do this, Masan. I don't want to interrupt you, but I had no idea you were going to answer it this way. So continue, please.
Well, if you get me involved, I'm going to give you some uncommon information. Thank you for that.
So we got the charcoal that heats it up. We know that there's a prime temperature that it needs to get. If it goes too hot, it spoils, basically. Yeah. It's got to be just right.
So charcoal, you ignited, it ignites somewhere around 800. So we know that we got at least the activating 800 and above. And if you fan charcoal, it'll go up to 2,700 degrees centigrade. Literally, you can melt iron with it, which is what they use to do the smelting there. It requires you to exercise prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice when you're trying to get within that operation. You have to practice all the virtues in order for you to make sure that that sweet spot is obtained. And if you do it right, you wind up with lime. And so you've got two elements out of the three that are mentioned in the Entered Apprentice working materials. Of course, they don't call them working materials, but now you know that it's cleverly veiled. And we have one thing left, and that's clay. And so I'm scratching my head saying, clay, I'm not looking for clay. I'm looking for lime and silica, ferric, and alumina oxides. So I said, well, let me look up what clay is involved. And I looked up clay, and it says, well, most clay is made up of alumina, ferric, and I mean, I'm losing it here. Ferric, alumina, and silica oxides. And I'm saying to myself, okay, so the very thing that I've been looking for is, where's the beef, where's the cement, is right there hidden in plain sight in the chalk, charcoal, and clay.
All right, so now we got to take this to the next level. If we start to examine this Masonically or with an esoteric mind, right? If we're literally given the ingredients of how to make cement, our job as master masons is to go out into the world armed with that little dinky trowel that we're shown in the third degree, with this cement that we make internally using all of these ingredients, right? And is to be the, for lack of a better term, the force of good. We're supposed to be out there being the example of the virtues of goodness.
Well, if you take a look at what's involved in creating cement operatively and apply it speculatively, if you take good look at the fact that in the Entered Apprentice degree, we are told that chalk, charcoal, and clay represents freedom, fervency, and zeal, you start recognizing that in order for you to cultivate cement within you, you have to find out symbolically what these elements represent in your life, so that as you're trying to apply them symbolically to others with this trowel, you will succeed. And chalk is real simple. It's freedom. It represents you coming in of your own free will and accord, coming through that inner door 3 times over. And you're doing it willingly, you're doing it consciously, and your free will is exercised, and it can't work any other way. And the interesting parallel here is, for love to be spread, it has to be done freely, but it also has to be accepted freely, which basically means you can't shove what's on that trowel in other people's direction unless, of course, they are in accord with you. And there's the number one lesson with the spreading of the cement. You use it freely. You come in freely, you exercise it freely, but you got to make sure that the individuals who you're spreading that cement, that direction, that they are indeed receptive to receiving it.
Wow. I mean, all I can say is, well, I hope for 2 things here. One is that for our listener, however you came across this episode, if it's through the podcast on Apple or iHeart or however, leave a comment if you have heard this explanation of the cement that we are taught Masonically to be spreading with the trowel, so that I know that, John's not the only one who's done all this work, and that it's someone. And if not, I really hope that you consider playing this episode in a lodge meeting as Masonic education, because I would guarantee that there are more men in our fraternity like me that just heard spread the cement to brotherly love. Okay, sounds good. Yeah. Hey, these other working tools, did I miss something? There's this whole box of other stuff that you're telling me about that I never knew were Masonic working tools. So I thank you for doing the research and explaining it. That
you're most welcome.
I'm always amazed with you. You never cease to amaze me. I know the questions I'm going to ask you. I never know what the answers are I'm going to get. So, but the good thing, they are answers. They're not more questions. You actually answer the questions. Let's get back to that box, so to speak, the craftsman working men's toolkit. Right? We're told all of these other working tools, they don't necessarily reveal themselves throughout the ritual and the degree. So my question is, these other tools, could there possibly be more than what we know of right now in Freemasonry?
Now, there's obviously more than the 6 that we are told within ritual are working tools. The success in using your trowel is going to be directly proportional to the internalization of all the other working tools. If you don't have your cable toe properly internalized, it's going to interfere with the love that you try to spread. In fact, it'll sabotage what it is that you're trying to spread if you don't have it internalized. The obligation, the flank circumpunct, which is referred to as the point within a circle flanked by 2 perpendicular parallel lines. If you are not obligated, if you're just giving it lip service, and this goes back to clay. Clay is zeal. Zeal comes from the root zealot, which is 4 out of the 5 some odd sects back in 2,000 years ago in the Mediterranean. You had the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Zealots, and there was another one. It's not coming to my mind right now, but the Zealots were absolutely known when they obligate themselves to do something, nothing got in their way. They made sure that whatever they obligated themselves toward, they followed through with no reservation and excuse. They made it happen. And hence, when you talk about clay, clay is the equivalent of zeal. Zeal is all about the obligation that you put your hands on the volume of sacred law, which is another working tool, and you committed yourself to do the work. And if you are just giving it lip service, your charcoal will never be ignited. You will never do the work. And charcoal is fervency, which is all about doing the work. You look it up in the thesaurus. Fervency and zeal are synonymous. However, there is a difference between the two. And when we talk about charcoal meaning fervency, we're talking about making sure that if your obligation is true, then your charcoal is going to be ignited and you are going to do the work. Well, if you're not obligated, spreading that, using that trowel, it's going to come across. Everybody's going to know your heart's not in it. You're actually pulled in 2 different directions, literally severed in twain, because your obligation is just lip service. And I can go through every single working tool and show that if you don't do the prior work and internalize what each and every one of those working tools represent, that trowel is going to be absolutely useless, other than maybe stabbing somebody with it, because that's effectively, if you haven't put the disciplines aside by the other working tools, that's the only thing that you could possibly do with it. And well, you are a ruffian in its use.
I started out with a question of, were you disappointed when you were handed the trowel? We kind of joked about this little tiny, symbolic trowel that were presented in the 3rd degree. But now looking back on it and having a better understanding of what it really symbolizes, how do you feel about the trowel as kind of the capstone working tool that's given to a master mason?
I believe it is taking all your working tools and applying them externally toward your brothers and toward society and toward your work, toward your family. If you've done the work and you have internalized all the other working tools, the trowel is going to be something that is absolutely useful in all that you do. Because what you're doing is you're using it to, first of all, you're spreading a bonding agent to bring it all together. And it may be work conditions, work employees, or your staff equals, or even somebody above you. If you have internalized all the other working tools, it's going to be really easy to spread that love that you have, because you'll, first and foremost, you will love the world because you love yourself. That's the entirety of all those tools, are to cultivate a self-love. And that doesn't mean it's selfless. It means that you truly do respect who you are and what you can offer the world. And by taking care of yourself, you can take care of others. And so that trowel represents a pinnacle in essence of all the work that you did to get to that point. And if you hadn't done the work that is required, you've got a nice showpiece, but it's not going to do you any good.
Which leads me to another question when we talk about the differences between the jurisdictions. And we've often talked on this podcast about the difference between the English and the American Masonic degrees. In English lodges, Master Masons are presented with 3 working tools at that level, the compasses, skerrit, and the pencil. How important is the difference between the working tools in the English and American ritual?
As I had indicated in previous shows, the compasses are already talked about and referred to and described in the first degree. Would venture to say that emulation, they give a very similar description in the first degree. They expand upon it in the third degree, but they really don't describe it as a working tool. I know they say it's a working tool, but if I recall, the compasses remind us of God's unerring and impartial justice, who, having defined for our instruction the limits of good and evil, which, by the way, also we have as the checkered pavement, will reward or punish us as we have obeyed or disregarded his divine commands. Well, where is the actual working tool described there in that statement? I'm not seeing it. I might be missing something. A working tool tells us how we are to apply it, and this is simply a reminder. So is it a working tool or is it a reminder? It leaves me with great questions, and I'll leave that up to people who experience the emulation to better describe that. I went through the Preston Webb, where we have just the trowel at the third degree. The emulation style ritual has the 3 working tools. We're told they're working tools, but in my understanding, they're not being described as a working tool. Now, the skerrit's different. It's working on a center pin. It's a long string as a guideline, and you draw it and use it to mark out the ground for a foundation. But let me ask you the question. If the entered apprentice degree is all about building a foundation, why isn't the skerrit being used at that particular point? Now, the argument could be made that, well, the Master Masons are there to help guide them in laying out their foundation. Wonderful. But we're not told about any of this at the first degree, saying, well, by the way, as you're using all these other working tools, you're going to have a Master Mason laying out using a skerrit. And it's like, we're told at the third degree level, you're a Master Mason. You're supposed to be using the skerrit from this point on. But nowhere in your education have you been guided in its use.
One of the thought pieces I was reading it's a short talk bulletin from Brother Jorge Sanchez, and I'll share the link to the quote unquote other working tools, the chisel, skerrit, and pencil. He talked about the difference kind of being that in the English version, their working tools for the Master Mason degree are for planning purposes, where in the American version, our working tool is the progression is basically to finish the building of King Solomon's temple. So really like 2 different ways of looking at the same topic or issue or theme. But in this instance, having gone through the American ritual, I think I'm a little bit more partial, that I like to think that our working tools are for the finishing and then you continue to the next level.
And if you remember, the trestle board is accompanied by implication with a pencil, which again is discussed in the first degree. It is a design tool, a working tool that we are to design our spiritual building and erect our spiritual building agreeable to God's designs and rules as laid out in the great books of nature and Revelation. Well, right then and there, we are given all that is necessary at the entered apprentice level, the very things that now are being reintroduced at the Master Mason level. So, yeah, they mentioned the pencil. And in all honesty, when I hear the description that the pencil teaches us that all our words and actions are not only being observed, but they're being recorded by God himself. And I'm saying to myself, well, where is that a working tool? It sounds to me like somebody's keeping tabs outside what we're doing, making sure that they're taking an account of our conduct throughout life. And here I am, is he going to be using the working tool? And I'm just kind of the subject of observation. So we're back to where is it a working tool? And then later on, they mention in emulation that, what we use it for design purposes. Well, we're back to what we mentioned in the Preston Webb in the first degree. When we talk about the trestle board, obviously you need a pencil there because you're not going to be, scratching things onto the board.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be using something to render what is conceived in the mind onto the piece of parchment or whatever you're using on the trestle board. So,
Right.
Maybe I am very partial to the Preston Webb. It's not like I hadn't really thought deeply about what emulation has to offer. I look at what is offered and I say, okay, I'm really happy that I went through the Preston Webb instead. Although, if I was one who was entered, passed, and raised in the emulation, I might have a different view of it. But I like the messages that Preston Webb has to offer. The chisel in the first degree about education. Well, all of what we are doing is educational. I do know that there is a tremendous emphasis on education in the second degree, and I hear no mention of the chisel. But I hear the other working tools about keeping us on track, the plumb level and the square. Oops, excuse me. I do know that I had a wonderful question last night with I was doing the working tools of the entered apprentice, the toolbox that we have talked about. And the question was, well, if we're developing the square, level, and plumb on the first degree, then how are we supposed to be applying it in the second degree? And I said, how do you think you're going to be keeping on track with your education, making sure that you keep all your actions square, making sure that you're not biased, plumb, and making sure everything's balanced? You're at that particular point, you have literally internalized all three of those working tools, and they are the basis of making sure that you focus on your education with nothing getting in the way. So, but this is all about the working tool of the Master Mason. And if we go in with line with what you're saying, all the other tools need to be discussed too, because it's all the tools, including the trowel.
And it's the star of the Master Mason degree. I want to go back to that. For some, it's the afternoon. Others, maybe the degree was conferred in the evening. And hopefully, as you've gone through your Masonic journey to be raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason, you've been able to attend lodges actively. I know a lot of jurisdictions are allowing their lodges to open up. In New York State, it seems like a kind of a recent thing to us. Within the last 4 years, we've been able to open our lodges on any of the 3 degrees so that brothers can come in and participate. You get to that.
I'm sorry, I was hitting who let the dogs in.
I mean, it was interesting the first time that we opened a lodge on the entered apprentice degree in New York. First, we had to learn, that part of the ritual for the opening of the lodge. But it was just, there's feeling like, are they allowed to be in here to witness? They are. This is okay that they're here for the entire meeting. I love it. I think it's one of the best things that we did as far as inclusion and bringing the brothers in. But getting back to that moment, I know a lot of guys will finish their Master Mason degree and they're told this is the highest degree that you can earn in the fraternity. And yes, the appendant and the concordant bodies are open, and usually those brothers are not shy to come right up to you and try to encourage you to come visit if you haven't already asked questions. But you laid out the idea of a Masonic roadmap that I thought was very interesting, as it really connects the end of one journey and the beginning of the lifelong learning that should continue for a newly raised Master Mason.
The roadmap talk, I came up with, I think I actually published it in the Craft Unmasked as one of the final chapters, that this is what all candidates need to hear. And I will make effort to share the highlights of that talk. It's about a page worth, but I effectively say, you have just experienced a roadmap. And you could say this at any one of the degrees. So whether they go through first, second, or third degree, it makes no difference, because each one is a roadmap unto itself. And I say that when I have opportunity to speak at any of the degrees, I say you've just experienced a roadmap. You have been given an opportunity to learn through a map the terrain that you must travel. And you can internalize this map, make it part of your head and hopefully part of your heart. But if you don't follow it and enter into the terrain that the map describes, you're never going to be the man that you can be. You have to go into these territories. You have to go in from the perspective of a youth, making sure that you are taking care of anything that may be thought of as immature. You have to go in as an adult, making sure that after you had brought your heart from chaos to order, that you're now bringing your head from chaos to order. And you can go in as a person who has age, where you're now bringing your spirit from chaos to order. So the first 2 degrees are roadmaps that help you cultivate your soul, both your emotional and intellectual aspects of your soul. And if you make it through that journey and bring order to the chaos of your soul through the first 2 degree works, you're now going to be endeavoring to erect a spiritual building agreeable to the designs that God himself has laid out in his designs and rules through the books of nature and revelation. And that is a spirit journey. And you do not want to get on a spiritual quest if your soul is in chaos. That's why the first and second degree is put out there. You have to make sure that your soul is in order before you start working on your spirit. And there is a huge difference between the two. And if you're going to build a spiritual building, you better understand what spirit is about, because everything that goes into the design of your spiritual building has to be spiritual. And how you find that out is you learn how to read God's book of nature and revelation. And there are several facets. It's not one individual book. It's not scripture alone. It is a multifaceted book that God renders in the canvas of the world. It could be rendered in scripture partially. It could be rendered in ancient philosophy and another, and by reading nature itself. But there's only one way that you're going to be able to look into God's words. And that is, you have to climb the staircase. You have to learn the secrets of a master mason. And there's only one way of doing that, and that is to climb the staircase of the second degree. But you can't just climb the staircase in the second degree. You have to also climb Jacob's ladder in the first degree, because no amount of head work that you can do in the second degree is going to ever bring wisdom without the heart being intimately connected to that knowledge. And that's where wisdom comes into play. Wisdom is not straight knowledge. Wisdom is knowledge that has a heart. And so we're talking about a roadmap, and each and every one of the degrees is a roadmap. And if you do the work that the roadmap directs you to do, you're on one wonderful journey. First is to cultivate the soul, and the second is to cultivate the spirit. And you can't do it out of order. You have to do it in that particular progression. And the maps tell you this. And so if you don't see the maps, find somebody who can explain them to you and make it very evident to you that it's explaining the terrain that you have to become not only familiar with, but you have to make that terrain your home. Well-traveled. You become a traveling man using the road maps.
And I've certainly enjoyed our journey, and you kind of being our sage, guiding us through these first 3 degrees. I'm kind of sad that we're closing out the Building Better Builder series on the working tools, but I feel that you've contributed so much information and background and practical and spiritual use for these working tools. And really, for a lot of brothers, I know that you've made sense of what they're given and what these words and what these tools mean. So I thank you for that.
You're most welcome. And I will return that thank you for making this opportunity available, not to just you and I to discuss these really important Masonic matters, but to be able to bring this to a large audience so that they can contemplate what it is that's being said and see how it might apply to their own journey. And hopefully it'll make their journey a little bit more interesting and fruitful.
Our work will continue. We have another episode planned with Brother John. That will be available for download on Monday, November 29th. We're still determining what we're going to be talking about for that one, but trust me, there is no shortage of Masonic questions or answers for Brother Nagy. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this one.
You're most welcome, and thank you for making it all possible, Brother Michael. I appreciate it.
If Masonic education is important to you, a reminder, you can sign up for our email newsletter at craftsmanonline.com. New episodes of our Craftsman Online podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until we get back together next time, let peace and harmony prevail.